Daenerys stood on the prow of her ship, letting the wind blow through the silver-white strands of her hair as she gazed upon the horizon. The sea roiled beneath her, its dark waters flecked with foam, and the salt spray misted her face. Though she had sailed across the narrow sea before, when she led her Unsullied and Dothraki from Essos to Dragonstone, this particular voyage carried with it a curious new weight. She was not on the way to another battlefield, at least not in the traditional sense. She was bound for Old Town, determined to free the Citadel from the corrupting influence of House Lannister. To Daenerys, knowledge was its own battlefield, and in her quest to build a better world than the one she had known, she understood she must ensure that those who pursued knowledge did so free of tyranny. The sunlight caught the silver pin shaped like a dragon on her cloak, and she ran her fingers over it absently. Tyrion had suggested that symbol, a subtle yet proud marking of her heritage. There was no use denying who she was, Daenerys Targaryen, mother of dragons, breaker of chains, but she did not intend to conquer the Citadel as she might a contested city. She hoped to liberate it, to give the maesters the freedom to practice their craft without having to bow to the pressure of any great house. And she knew the Lannisters had always sought control, not only through armies and gold but also through subtlety, through the shaping of narratives and gatekeeping of knowledge. By her side stood Tyrion Lannister, face impassive, but there was a flicker in his mismatched eyes. Tyrion knew the Citadel intimately, not from personal training. He was no maester, but from countless books he had read, from all the rumors that circulated at court, and from the cunning webs his sister Cersei's spies wove around the Seven Kingdoms. Tyrion's expression was thoughtful, as if already planning dialogues and alliances. With him was Missandei of Noth, whose unwavering composure and gentle intelligence had long served Daenerys well. And near them was Grey Worm, silent and watchful, dutiful commander of the Unsullied. In her mind, Daenerys pictured the immense, labyrinthine citadel rising on the shores of the Honeywine. She had never walked its halls, never smelled its tomes, never touched its ancient ledgers. But she had heard much of it from Samwell Tarly and from old histories that described how the learned men of Westeros gathered there to forge their chains link by link. She hoped, with a faint smile, that those links might no longer be the shackles the Lannisters seemed to have turned them into. She wanted them to be something purer, something that served knowledge rather than politics. But she was no fool. She knew that even men of great learning were not immune to corruption. And she knew her own name, Targaryen, would stir fear in some of them. For generations, the Citadel had taught that Targaryens were unpredictable, potentially mad, a threat, in short, to the balance of power. Her dragons cut shadows across the clouds above. Regal, Viserion, and Drogon soared in the sky, their roars a distant thunder that rattled the hearts of men on the deck. Sailors peered up in a mixture of reverence and fear, but Daenerys merely felt comforted. The dragons were her children, grown now into colossal beasts. She had begun to keep them closer to her, especially after the wars that ravaged the land. She had feared losing them. She had lost so many she cared for. She refused to lose more. Yet she also realized that bringing dragons to Old Town could be seen as an aggression, a threat. She had made it clear to her council that she did not intend to burn the Citadel to ash. That would defeat the very purpose of the journey. "Your Grace," Tyrion said quietly, stepping closer. He squinted into the midday sun before turning his face toward her. "We should arrive in Old Town by late afternoon, if the winds remain favorable. Are you certain you don't want to send another raven ahead of us?" She shook her head. "We already let them know of our intentions." The Citadel had time to respond. They chose not to. If they remain silent, let them be silent. But I will still step onto that shore and request an audience with the Archmaesters. He gave a curt nod. "As you wish. Perhaps they do not know how to respond to such an approach. The Citadel is accustomed to hosting the scions of great houses as novices and acolytes, not an army at their doorstep. They will see I come not as a conqueror but as someone who seeks their help and partnership," Daenerys replied. "I only hope the Lannisters' hold on them has not rotted their minds beyond reason." A hush passed over them, broken only by the spray of the waves. Missandei put a hand on Daenerys' elbow in gentle reassurance. Knowledge can be as stubborn as an old oak, your grace, but that same stubbornness might make it endure. No matter what deals were made with House Lannister, I believe many of the maesters will remember their vows. Daenerys managed a small smile. She appreciated Missandei's unwavering faith. There was a truth in it. Not every maester could be corrupted, not every man of learning so easily swayed by gold or power. Still, the rumors had lingered. The Lannisters had cleverly gained influence in the Citadel by funding expansions, by financing new wings of the library, by providing patronage to certain maesters who specialized in ravingcraft and whisper networks. And it was said that Qyburn's dark arts, once practiced in secret, had found subtle defenders within certain circles, men who saw the potential in macabre knowledge. How thoroughly had these influences taken root? That was the question that gnawed at Daenerys. The day wore on, and as the sun climbed higher, Old Town's spires rose into view. The high tower soared, crowned by a flame that gleamed in the distance. Nearby, the grand structure of the Citadel gradually came into focus. From afar, it seemed peaceful, a beacon of scholarship amid the sprawling city. But Daenerys could not ignore the tension in her chest. The city had once been neutral ground, a place where knowledge reigned supreme and the rivalries of houses were kept at bay. Yet the wars and intrigues of the last few years had changed the face of Westeros in ways none could have predicted. She reminded herself that her purpose was as pure as she could make it, to free knowledge so it might flourish. She was not there to subjugate maesters. She had, in her own life, seen what tyranny and oppression could do. She wanted none of it for Westeros, and certainly none of it for the place where all knowledge was meant to be kept. Their ships moored along the docks of Old Town. This alone was an event. 3 dragons spiraling overhead, Daenerys Targaryen disembarking with her entourage, and a regiment of Unsullied forming rank behind her. A hush fell upon the dockworkers and fishermen, who stared at the arriving retinue with awe. Word spread through the city's winding streets that the Dragon Queen had come, that she was making her way to the Citadel. Many had expected her to strike King's Landing anew if she were to break any hold of the Lannisters. Few guessed she would appear in Old Town first. Daenerys, Tyrion, Missandei, and Grey Worm led the way, walking through the wide avenues. The clink of armor and the measured tread of the Unsullied was both ominous and disciplined. Daenerys had reduced her retinue to show less aggression, but she was no fool. She would not walk unguarded into a place that might be under the sway of her enemies. Still, she forced herself to maintain a serene expression, chin lifted proudly. The closer they drew to the Citadel, the more they felt the presence of the maesters. A few novices lingered at the gates, whispering, eyes wide at the spectacle. Older maesters shuffled by, some clutching scrolls to their chests, others glancing nervously at the sky overhead where dragons might pass. Gulls circled the tower and cawed, as if heralding the arrival of something strange and momentous. A single white-haired maester, tall, with a face carved by wrinkles, stood at the threshold to greet them. He wore a chain of many metals around his neck: silver, iron, brass, copper, gold. The myriad links glinted in the daylight. His eyes, though milky with age, still held a spark of curiosity. "Your Grace," he said, bowing stiffly. "I am Archmaester Italo, Keeper of Histories, caretaker of the library. I welcome you to the Citadel." Daenerys inclined her head. "Archmaester, thank you for receiving me. I requested an audience with the Archmaesters. Is that to be granted?" He hesitated. Behind him, other maesters watched, uncertain how to proceed. Word must have raced ahead of her from the docks, and yet they still appeared unprepared. The older man let out a slow breath. "Yes, of course. We did not anticipate your arrival so swiftly, but we are prepared to convene. Please follow me. We will guide your guard to an appropriate courtyard, though it is customary for outsiders not to bring weapons into the library halls." Grey Worm tensed, but Daenerys gently held up a hand. "He and a small group of my Unsullied will remain outside. The rest of my guard will wait in the city. I understand your traditions," she said, "and I will respect them, provided I am treated fairly." Archmaester Italo offered a wan smile. "We strive to treat all with fairness, your grace. If you will come with me." Tyrion, Missandei, and a handful of guards accompanied Daenerys inside. Grey Worm and most of the Unsullied remained in the courtyard, forming a disciplined ring. Daenerys was led through stone corridors that smelled of parchment and old candle wax. The floors were adorned with intricate mosaics that depicted constellations, ravens, and the seven-pointed star. But there were also older symbols, reminders that the Citadel predated some of the current religions. A hush pervaded the space, as though centuries of study had soaked into the very stones and instilled in them a reverential quiet. They reached a tall door of dark wood. The Archmaester pushed it open to reveal a large, circular chamber. Candlelight flickered over shelves of scrolls. A round table occupied the center, and around it, several men in maesters' robes were already seated or standing, their chains clinking softly. Daenerys entered, and all eyes fell upon her. She saw in some faces curiosity and caution, in others a thinly veiled suspicion. Archmaester Ibroz sat among them. Daenerys recognized him from Samwell Tarly's descriptions and from her own intelligence gatherers. He had been rumored to favor the Lannisters' cause subtly, often counseling caution to any who might challenge the crown. Another man, Archmaester Walgrave, dozed, or at least seemed to, though Daenerys sensed an alertness behind his closed eyelids. She also noted Archmaester Marwyn, a grizzled man with an unkempt appearance, standing slightly apart, arms folded as though resisting the group. He had a defiant look in his eyes, as if he already had grown weary of the Citadel's politics. With her usual regal composure, Daenerys stepped to the center of the room, Tyrion and Missandei flanking her. She stood straight, shoulders back, and spoke in a calm but commanding voice. "My lords, I come here today in peace and with respect for your order. Yet I also come with a plea and with a question. The Citadel is said to be the foundation of learning in the Seven Kingdoms, an institution that fosters knowledge and reason above all else. But I have heard troubling reports that the Lannisters have placed you under certain obligations." A ripple of discomfort passed through the gathering. Ibroz spoke first, clearing his throat. "Your Grace, the Citadel remains neutral. We serve the realm. We forge maesters for every castle, every purpose. You serve the realm best by ensuring truth is not chained," Daenerys said, her voice quiet but resonant. "But in recent years, the truth has been distorted by those who hold power. My own experiences in King's Landing have shown me how cunningly House Lannister manipulates information, through fear, gold, and intimidation. I have come to ask if you are truly free from such manipulation." Archmaester Italo said softly, "We remain independent, though we do rely on certain benefactors for expansions to our library, or for funding the novices who come to study. The Lannisters, being wealthy, have contributed. But that does not mean we are their puppets." Marwyn gave a harsh, knowing laugh that caused a few heads to turn. He made a gesture of dismissal at Ibroz. "Enough, Ibroz. Let us speak plainly. The Lannisters have always sought to control what is written in the chronicles that will be read by future generations. Funding is not merely charity. We all know that gold comes with strings. You, more than anyone, have benefited from those strings." Ibroz bristled. "We are men of learning, not mercenaries. We do not let donors dictate our research." "That is not what I have seen," Marwyn shot back, "nor what I have heard in hushed corners of these halls." Daenerys did not raise her voice, but the tension among the maesters was palpable. She continued, "I do not wish to strip you of your patronage. I wish to ensure that you may practice your calling without fear of reprisal or expectation of favor. The Citadel should be above petty politics. But if the Lannisters hold your purse strings or threaten you in secret, that independence is lost." Archmaester Ibroz searched for the right words, but none came readily to him. Tyrion stepped forward, and Daenerys allowed him to speak. He folded his hands behind his back and regarded the maesters with an air of careful diplomacy. "My lords, for too long, the realm has labored under the illusions sown by my family. I, Tyrion of House Lannister, know better than most how my sister thinks. She sought to quell challenges to her rule by controlling the Citadel's official stance on events. Wars, successions, the legitimacy of claims. She wanted her version of history to be the only one that survived. I believe many of you, if not most, did not willingly submit to this. But the specter of a crossbow in the library, or the threat of losing all your funding, can do wonders for compliance. We have come to propose a solution, one that frees you of that yoke and ensures you remain respected and secure in your roles as keepers of the realm's knowledge. A hush followed. Missandei, her voice soft, added, "The Queen means no harm to the Citadel. She values your role. She values knowledge. But she cannot abide secrets that would oppress the truth." Daenerys let that statement hang in the air. She had no intention of launching a diatribe against them, but she wanted them to know she was serious. If they refused her, if they clung to Lannister gold, she would have to take stronger steps. She hoped it would not come to that. Archmaester Italo finally broke the silence. "What is it you propose, Your Grace? You speak of freeing us, but from what precisely and how?" Daenerys drew in a breath. "First, I wish to release you from any obligation to present only one side of the truth in your chronicles or your counsel to lords. Secondly, I am prepared to offer funding to the Citadel entirely without condition, and to negotiate with other great houses so that your order might receive support from multiple sources, not just the Iron Throne. If I rule the Seven Kingdoms, I will vow to keep the Citadel independent, so long as you do not misuse your power to mislead the realm. Lastly, I require that any direct attempts by the Lannisters or any other house to manipulate your records be made public. No more hidden deals." Ibros looked offended, but whether at the implication that they had been deceiving the realm or at the open mention of bribes, it was hard to say. Archmaester Marwyn, however, nodded approvingly, as if he had expected such a stance. He kept his arms folded and watched for the reactions of the others. Daenerys continued, "With the realm in upheaval, knowledge is more crucial than ever. We face uncertain seasons, political realignments, and yes, even threats from beyond the known world. Your guidance and expertise can save countless lives, but not if it's twisted for the benefit of one house." A moment passed, and Walgrave suddenly opened his eyes, speaking in a surprisingly lucid tone. "The Targaryens once had the Citadel's respect, but the memory of the Mad King, that memory runs deep. How do we know you will not burn our libraries if you do not like what we say about you?" Daenerys did not flinch. She had heard such accusations before. "I am not my father. I will not burn men for disagreeing with me or for speaking truth. I will not censor your records. I only wish to ensure that no other house can do so either." Walgrave closed his eyes again, nodding slowly. The room felt thick with an unspoken tension. Ibros, Italo, and a few others exchanged glances, perhaps measuring how many of their colleagues agreed with Daenerys' proposal. Tyrion's face revealed nothing, but Daenerys had known him long enough to guess he was carefully studying each reaction, calculating alliances within the Citadel. Finally, Ibros sighed. He placed his hands on the table, leaning forward. "Your Grace, you have made your position clear. We will discuss the matter among ourselves. If what you say is true, that you wish to preserve our independence rather than subvert it, then perhaps a new arrangement can be found. However, we cannot accept such sweeping changes overnight. We must convene with the rest of the Archmaesters." Daenerys inclined her head. "Very well, but know that I do not plan to leave Oldtown until we have an agreement. And if the Lannisters attempt to interfere before we reach that agreement, I will not stand idle." With that, the assembly was adjourned. The tension remained thick in the air as Ibros rose, smoothing his robes. Archmaester Italo offered to show Daenerys to temporary quarters, a gracious courtesy. Marwyn stood back, eyeing Daenerys thoughtfully. The other maesters filed out, speaking in low voices. Tyrion gave Daenerys a small nod, as if to say progress has been made, but we have more to do. They were led to a modest suite in one of the Citadel's towers, far from the novices' dormitories. The room was spare but well-kept, with shelves of books lining the walls, histories of the Reach, maps of the known world, volumes on the magic of Valyria that had not been destroyed. Daenerys ran her fingertips over the spines of the tomes, marveling at how much knowledge lay within these walls. The glow of the setting sun peeked through a narrow window, illuminating motes of dust that danced in the air. She allowed herself a moment's rest, stepping to the window to gaze out at Old Town. She could see the tall outline of the starry September in the distance, the winding Honeywine, and beyond that, the silhouettes of her dragons perched on a distant rooftop, watchful guardians in a city that was not yet sure whether they should cheer or cower. "It went about as well as could be expected," Tyrion remarked, breaking the silence. Missandei had taken a seat at the small table in the corner, her eyes scanning an old treatise on trade routes. Grey Worm and 2 Unsullied stood quietly near the door, their spears at the ready. Daenerys turned to Tyrion. "Did you see Ebro's face when we mentioned making hidden deals public?" Tyrion nodded. He was none too pleased, likely because he has made a few deals of his own. "Still, he can't deny the logic of your argument. And there are others, like Marwyn, who seem to support your stance. If we press carefully, we might sway enough of them. But do not underestimate Ho. W. Deeply certain maesters might be entangled with the Lannisters." Daenerys's mouth set in a grim line. "I do not intend to, but I hope to give them a chance to turn away from that path without bloodshed." Night came swiftly. Candles were lit in the chamber, and the city beyond glimmered with lamps and torches. Somewhere, a bell tolled. Daenerys sat with Missandei and Tyrion, discussing their next steps. She knew it would take more than one meeting to shift the balance of the Citadel. She also knew that the Lannisters might still have agents within Old Town. If news reached King's Landing that Daenerys was in the Citadel seeking to unseat their influence, she might soon face a host of complications. Perhaps assassins or attempts at sabotage. She was not frightened. She had survived much worse. But she knew it would test her resolve. She wondered briefly what Jon Snow, Aegon Targaryen truly, would have said had he been here. His own respect for knowledge had grown after he learned of his parentage and the role Samwell Tarly played in uncovering it. But he was far in the north, overseeing the reconstruction of lands ravaged by the wars against the undead. A faint sadness stirred in her at that thought. She had parted ways with him on uneasy terms, their personal feelings tangled in the harsh reality of politics. Would he stand with her now in this quest to free the Citadel from Lannister influence? She believed so, but it was not a question she could dwell on. She had a mission, and she would see it through with or without him. The following day, Daenerys rose early. She left Missandei and Tyrion to coordinate with the Archmesters, while she herself took a walk through the Citadel's corridors, escorted by a trio of Unsullied. She wished to see more of this fabled place, to sense the pulse of knowledge that flowed here. The labyrinthine hallways were lined with statues, busts of past maesters and great scholars. She passed novices in plain robes, heads bowed over dusty tomes, and acolytes practicing their letters by candlelight. The smell of parchment and old ink was overpowering. As she wandered, she came upon a smaller courtyard, open to the sky. In the center stood a weirwood stump, long since cut, leaving only a pale trunk. The space was deserted, quiet except for the faint rustling of leaves from the small garden around it. Daenerys stepped forward and placed a hand on the stump, feeling the smooth texture of the ancient wood. She thought of the old gods, the myriad beliefs that crisscrossed Westeros, and how knowledge of them, too, was stored within the Citadel. She felt a strange surge of emotion. She had been taught so little of Westeros as a girl, always fleeing across the sea, living on scraps of lore. Now she stood in the heart of the continent's memory, yet it was a memory she still struggled to fully claim as her own. She heard a footstep behind her. Turning, she saw Archmaester Marwyn. He regarded her with guarded respect. "Your Grace," he said in a low voice, "I thought I might find you wandering. This corner of the Citadel is seldom visited by the others. They find little use in the old gods, or in half-forgotten magics." Daenerys studied him. "Yet you do not shy away from such things." He offered a crooked smile. "I'm called Marwyn the Mage, Many of my colleagues think I'm too willing to dabble in arcane matters. Some even suspect me of meddling with dark arts. But all I've done is seek knowledge wherever it may be found, whether in old runes or the traditions of the Valyrians. Is that not our duty? Her eyes flickered with interest. If that is the Citadel's duty, then perhaps you and I share a common ground. I too have sought knowledge of dragons, of magic, and it has aided me in my struggles. Marwyn nodded, his gaze drifting to the weirwood stump. The greatest mistake the Citadel ever made was to assume that magic died out, and therefore it need not be studied anymore. That was centuries ago, after the doom of Valyria. A narrower mind prevailed, believing that the arcane was all but gone. But we have seen it return in dragons, in prophecies. Daenerys did not respond immediately. She thought of her dragons, born of fire and blood, and all the prophecies whispered about her, some calling her a savior, others a destroyer. I seek not to rule by magic alone, she said softly, but I do not deny its place in this world. He gave a thoughtful hum. It is wise of you, and perhaps that is why I find your offer intriguing. Freeing the Citadel from Lannister strings is the first step, but it must also free itself from its own dogmatic views. We have spent centuries building walls around our knowledge, deciding which learning is acceptable and which is not. That is as dangerous as any political manipulation, in my view. Daenerys understood. And you believe that if the Citadel becomes truly independent, it will be more open to studying the full breadth of knowledge, magic included? Marwyn shrugged. One can hope. Some of the archmasters may cling to their biases, but time can wear down even the thickest stones. All I know is that the Citadel must be reminded of its true purpose. And if you truly wish to transform the flow of knowledge, as you say, you will need allies here. Allies unafraid to challenge tradition. A faint smile curved Daenerys' lips. Will you be such an ally? Marwyn inclined his head. I am not known for my love of the status quo. You may count on me to speak in favor of your proposal, although I suspect we'll both face resistance from men who fear what might happen if their power is not managed from King's Landing. But we must try. Daenerys felt a seed of hope. Thank you, Archmaester. I will remember your support. He paused, then added quietly, there are secrets within these walls that could shake the realm. Histories older than the Targaryen conquest, records that speak of things far beyond our current war-torn land. If you succeed, if you truly give the Citadel the freedom to explore and share them, be prepared for what they reveal. Some knowledge is not easily born. A flicker of caution passed through Daenerys. I have borne many burdens already, Archmaester. If the truth can save lives or guide us toward a better future, I will accept it. He seemed satisfied with that answer, then took his leave. Daenerys lingered by the weirwood stump, contemplating Marwyn's words. The notion of even more profound secrets did not surprise her. The world was vast, and the Citadel had stood for centuries. What might be hidden in its deepest vaults, or in the minds of its oldest scholars? She returned to the tower suite, greeted by Tyrion, who was in deep conversation with a novice. The young man scurried away at the sight of the queen, leaving Tyrion to give her a slight bow. Your Grace, he said wryly, I'm beginning to miss the simpler tasks of war councils and siege tactics. Negotiating with maesters feels like navigating a labyrinth built by a spider. Daenerys gave him a pointed look. You're the one who thrives in labyrinths, Lord Tyrion. He shrugged. Sometimes. Ibros and a few others are meeting now, likely discussing how to approach your demands. We should have an update soon. I've been garnering what rumors I can. It seems some of the archmaesters might be willing to break ties with the Lannisters more openly if we can reassure them that the crown, under your rule, will not starve their coffers. Daenerys thought of her own coffers. She had resources seized from various battles, but she could not sustain the Citadel alone. I plan to encourage multiple houses to fund the Citadel. Houses from the north, the Vale, Dorne. That way, the Citadel isn't beholden to any single benefactor. Tyrion nodded. A wise approach, but we have to present it carefully, or Ibros will claim we're simply replacing Lannister gold with Targaryen gold. He'll need to see a broader coalition. Perhaps you can summon a representative from House Tyrell, well, from what's left of it. Or the new lords of Highgarden. The Tarleys, ironically, might be good to have on our side, if Samwell can reason with his family. Daenerys said, Samwell Tarly studied here. I wonder if his presence might sway them. He told me once how stifling the Citadel could be, how reluctant they were to believe him about the White Walkers. But if we can show that the threat was real and the war was won with knowledge and cooperation, perhaps it will open some eyes. Tyrion pursed his lips. We should send for him if we can. He might hold some influence among the younger acolytes, and his father's death notwithstanding, there might be enough respect for the Tarly name in these halls. So they agreed, and a raven was dispatched north, hoping to reach Samwell Tarly and invite him to Oldtown to assist. Daenerys could only pray that Sam would come, and that the Citadel would be ready to listen to one of their own. In the meantime, negotiations pressed on. Over the following days, Daenerys and her council met with archmaesters in small groups. Archmaester Ebrose proved the most resistant, insisting that the Lannisters had never coerced the Citadel to falsify records. But others, including Marwyn, quietly pointed out instances where the official narratives of the wars were slanted toward Lannister victories, and where certain accounts of Targaryen supporters were mysteriously missing or deemed unreliable. Daenerys refrained from making direct accusations, letting Tyrion skillfully lay out the evidence. She wanted to present herself not as a petty claimant seeking to rewrite history, but as a queen determined to keep history honest. Some archmaesters worried about the political fallout if they publicly denounced the Lannisters. Cersei Lannister may be dead, said one older man, but House Lannister remains wealthy and vengeful. Jaime Lannister might be reformed in some eyes, but they still hold sway in the Westerlands. They could cut off our supply of silver and hamper trade routes. We must be practical. Daenerys understood their fear but reminded them that multiple houses would ensure stability. No single house, not even the Lannisters, can starve you if all the others stand with you, and if you remain neutral, it will encourage them to abide by your wisdom. Right now, the name Lannister is still a specter haunting these halls. I wish to dispel that specter. Behind closed doors, she also heard rumors of hidden bribes. Some maesters were paid extra stipends to pass along certain intelligence to Lannister allies. Others were told to dismiss or belittle any miraculous or magical events that might lend credibility to Daenerys' reign. The notion that dragons had returned was still, in some circles, treated as an exaggerated rumor. Daenerys found that notion almost comical, given that her 3 dragons nested outside Oldtown, occasionally swooping over the harbor to fish. Yet the Citadel was a fortress of skepticism, often refusing to believe what they did not understand. In time, Samwell Tarly arrived. He came with Gilly and Little Sam, traveling by horse down from the northern regions. The Citadel gates opened to him, though he wore no chain. The maesters regarded him with suspicion, for Sam had left them abruptly before, violating certain rules, though he had done so in the name of the war against the White Walkers. Daenerys greeted him warmly, recalling how he had once been the first to discover her familial ties to Jon. She thanked him for coming. Sam looked around the halls with a mixture of fondness and exasperation. I spent so many hours in the library, reading about the Long Night, the Targaryen conquest, and everything else. But no matter how much I tried to warn them about the threat to the north, they told me I was chasing fairy tales. I fear many of the archmaesters won't be quick to trust me now. Daenerys touched his arm. Still, your voice might carry weight. You know how these halls work, and you can speak to how knowledge saved us all from the undead. We need them to understand that knowledge free from political manipulation can save the realm again. Sam nodded, determined. If I can help, I will. They held a private audience with several archmaesters, including Ebrose and Italo. Sam spoke passionately about how ignoring the existence of the White Walkers nearly doomed the realm. He detailed how the Citadel's strict adherence to certain rational doctrines blinded them to the threats that knowledge of magic, dragons, and old prophecies could have addressed much sooner. He presented evidence of old manuscripts that had been dismissed or locked away. Ebrose listened, uneasy but rapt. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that the Citadel's reluctance to consider the extraordinary had nearly cost them the living realm. Daenerys seized that moment. "You see now that knowledge must not be censored or shaped to fit one family's convenience," she said. "We need an honest Citadel, ready to learn and advise, not a Citadel that bows to coin or fear." The negotiations continued into the night. By candlelight, the Archmasters deliberated, voices raised in heated debate. Tyrion occasionally made a wry quip, defusing tension when tempers flared. Sam answered their questions with earnest honesty. Missandei noted the parallels between the Citadel's knowledge and the Associ libraries that had been sacked by warlords. "Once knowledge is destroyed or locked away," she said, "it can take generations to reclaim it." At last, near dawn, a consensus began to form. Ibros, though reluctant, had enough sense to read the room. Most of the Archmasters agreed that the Citadel's official stance had to be updated. They would declare themselves independent of any single house's patronage and accept a broader base of support, both from the crown should Daenerys reign, and from other houses that wished to honor scholarship. They would end exclusive deals with House Lannister and remove any hidden donors' rights to alter or suppress records. Several old treaties would be publicly annulled, and any maester found to be still funneling intelligence to a single house without the Citadel's knowledge would be stripped of their chain. It was a monumental shift for an institution known for its conservatism, but the memory of the wars, the sight of dragons in the sky, and the logic of ensuring their own security guided them toward acceptance. Daenerys felt relief flood her as she and the Archmasters signed a charter. It was a carefully worded document, ensuring the Citadel's independence and underscoring the responsibilities it held to record truth and advise fairly. Her signature was placed beside that of Archmaester Italo, who was still the caretaker of the library, and Ibros, who remained a leading figure, though his influence would be checked by others like Marwyn. The dawn sun crept through the narrow windows. Tyrion shook Daenerys' hand. "Congratulations, Your Grace. You've done something many kings and queens wouldn't have even thought to attempt. You've negotiated the freedom of knowledge from a great house's grip. It may not be as dramatic as toppling a tyrant, but the ripples of this act will outlast any single war." Sam looked tired but elated. "If only Maester Aemon could have seen this day," he said softly. "A day when the Targaryen legacy was one of enlightenment, not madness." Daenerys swallowed the lump in her throat. "I wish he were here too." In the ensuing days, the transformation began in earnest. The Citadel announced, via white ravens, that it was renewing its dedication to impartial scholarship. Copies of the new charter were sent to major lords across Westeros, including the North, the Vale, Dorne, the Riverlands, and even to King's Landing, where the Lannisters still held some measure of power in the Westerlands. It was a bold statement, signaling that the Citadel would no longer serve a single house's interests. Reactions varied. Some lords applauded the move, seeing it as a step toward stability. Others, particularly loyalists to House Lannister, decried it as a power grab by Daenerys Targaryen. But in truth, none could refute the Citadel's right to govern its own affairs, and many recognized that a free Citadel was in the realm's best interest. Within the Citadel itself, a quiet revolution took place. The maesters began revisiting old manuscripts that had been sidelined due to political pressure. Histories that told the Targaryen perspective of Robert's rebellion were put back in circulation, side by side with the Baratheon version. The records of the War of the Five Kings were examined, with new footnotes acknowledging how Lannister gold and influence might have impacted the official retelling. Some maesters, encouraged by Marwyn, ventured into the more esoteric sections of the library, unearthing treatises on dragon lore and prophecies of the Long Night. Daenerys made it clear she did not demand they rewrite history to glorify her. She only insisted that the record be complete. One day, she stood with Sam before a lectern in the Citadel's Grand Library, scanning a newly compiled chronicle of the war against the Night King. In it, Sam had contributed a first-hand account of the siege of Winterfell, the role of dragons in the battle, and the alliance of men that led to victory. To Daenerys' surprise, he included details of her own mistakes as well as her triumphs, such as the devastation she wrought at times when the battles grew desperate. She read it all, lips set in a thin line. When she finished, she turned to Sam. "It's truthful," she said. Sam nodded. I've tried to be. History should not hide mistakes, no matter whose they are. Daenerys set down the text. Then it shall stand, she said quietly. Let the realm read and learn. Outside the library, dragons still soared, occasionally perching on ancient rooftops. The novices and acolytes grew more accustomed to their presence, though some still trembled at the roars echoing across the spires. One afternoon, Daenerys brought Regal to land in the wide courtyard by the docks, giving the townsfolk of Old Town a chance to see the creature up close. The old stones groaned beneath his weight, but he did no harm. It was a symbolic gesture. The Dragon Queen, no longer an invader, but a protector of knowledge, forging a new bond with the city that had once only feared the Targaryens. Meanwhile, Tyrion worked tirelessly with the Archmesters to establish a system of funding from multiple houses. Ravens flew out daily, carrying proposals to high lords. The North was asked for furs and fish, the Vale for grain, Dorne for exotic spices and gold from trade routes, the Riverlands for produce. The Iron Islands, eager to improve their standing after the wars, offered some shipments of iron and tin. In this way, the Citadel's reliance on any single flow of gold was diminished, preventing a repeat of the Lannister stranglehold. The negotiations were complex, but gradually, a patchwork of support emerged. In parallel, word reached Daenerys that King's Landing was unsettled by her actions. The new Lannister lord who held sway there, be it Jaime or another cousin, was sending envoys to question the Citadel's charter. Some rumored that mercenaries might be hired to stir trouble in Old Town or to sabotage the shipping routes. Daenerys read these reports impassively. She trusted her Unsullied to maintain security, and she had allies among the Redwine fleet if the Lannisters tried anything by sea. Besides, if the Citadel stood firm, it would be a poor move to attack the center of learning, a place revered across Westeros. Daenerys doubted the lords of the realm would easily forgive such sacrilege. Still, she remained vigilant. One evening, walking among the greenish canals near the Citadel's southern walls, Daenerys encountered a small group of maesters who were discarding old texts. She overheard them muttering about purging certain irrelevant volumes. Something in their tone struck her as odd. Approaching, she saw that one text was a record of genealogies from the era following Aegon's conquest. Another was a codex of rumored magical practices from Ashai. She asked them why they were discarding them. Too speculative, one maester said dismissively. Genealogies are incomplete, and the magical treatise is unverified. We need to make space for new works. Daenerys frowned. Did not our new charter state that no knowledge should be suppressed without thorough review? They exchanged glances. Well, yes, your grace, one of them stammered, but these are worthless scraps, the ravings of madmen. Madmen sometimes see truths hidden from the sane, Daenerys replied, recalling the words of Marwyn. At the very least, store them for reference. Do not let them be lost to dust. They hesitated, but her authority was unambiguous. Reluctantly, they nodded and took the volumes back inside. Daenerys continued her walk along the canal, pondering how deeply the old habits ran. The Citadel's transformation would not happen overnight, but at least the seeds of change were planted. Some days later, the city erupted in subdued celebration. A new White Raven had been released, bearing the news that the Citadel was ratifying the charter in full, binding itself to independence from any one house. The novices, less steeped in old loyalties, were excited about the prospect of a new era. Daenerys had even sponsored scholarships for orphans of the war to study at the Citadel, ensuring that knowledge would no longer be the exclusive realm of the aristocracy. She intended to open the doors wider, so that talent, not birth, determined who could wear a maester's chain. The Archmesters balked at first, but seeing her resolve, they began to discuss ways to implement it. In the face of a generation nearly lost to war, they recognized the need for fresh minds and fresh perspectives. Tyrion teased her one morning as they stood on a balcony overlooking the Honeywine. Careful, your grace. Soon you'll be known as the Queen of Scholars rather than the Mother of Dragons. She allowed herself a small laugh. If it secures peace and prosperity for the realm, I'll wear whatever name they give me." He nodded, a wry smile on his lips. "I must admit, I never quite pictured you as an educational reformer. I always suspected you'd conquer the 7 kingdoms with fire and blood. Instead, you're doing it with parchment and ravens. Not quite as dramatic, but perhaps more enduring." She turned to face him. "I've seen enough fire and blood to last 1,000 lifetimes, Tyrion. It's time for something else." Indeed, she sensed in her soul that her destiny might be more than just sitting on the Iron Throne. The wars for that throne had torn the land asunder. Perhaps part of her destiny was to break that cycle, to lay the foundations for a realm that valued learning, collaboration, and truth. She still carried scars from the battles she had fought, losses that haunted her. Changing the Citadel would not bring the dead back, but maybe it would stop future injustices. Maybe the next time an otherworldly threat arose, or the next time a tyrant tried to seize control of the realm, there would be a bedrock of knowledge and unity to resist it. She still had many tasks ahead. She had yet to fully consolidate her claim to the throne, had yet to mend the rift between her and Jon. But for now, she let herself take solace in a single victory, small by the standards of armies, but vast in its implications. The transformation of the Citadel was underway, a transformation that would echo across generations. In the weeks that followed, the subtle changes became more apparent. Daenerys walked the corridors and saw novices studying books once locked away in restricted vaults. She observed archmasters debating not only the mundane facts of harvest cycles but also the significance of prophecies. She noticed that the Lannister banners, once discreetly hung in certain corners as a reminder of patronage, had been removed. Instead, the Citadel now displayed only its own sigil, a ring of links encircling an upright torch. Knowledge, lighting the darkness. One afternoon, she climbed to the top of the Citadel's highest tower, accompanied by only a handful of guards. From there, she could see all of Old Town laid out beneath her. The high tower stood in regal glory, and the starry September shone with light. Ships came and went in the harbor. Her dragons rode the thermals overhead, wings outstretched, black silhouettes against the pale sky. She thought of her ancestors who first forged alliances with the Citadel, who recognized the power of knowledge. Then she thought of those Targaryens who broke with the Citadel, seeing them as an obstacle to the old ways of magic. The relationship between House Targaryen and the Maesters had always been fraught with tension and compromise. Now, perhaps a new chapter was being written, a chapter in which the synergy between dragons and scholars might bring about a golden age of learning, or at least the seeds of one. She closed her eyes, letting the sea breeze caress her face. She remembered the first time she had ever held a book about Westeros in Essos, how foreign it all had seemed. The pages spoke of a place she had never known, that she had only heard about from her brother's bitter rants. Now she stood at the heart of that realm, shaping its future. It was humbling and exhilarating all at once. A flutter of wings broke her reverie. A raven landed on the stone ledge, bearing a small scroll. One of her guards took the scroll and handed it to her. She unrolled it, scanning the words. It was a message from the north, from Sansa Stark. The letter congratulated her on her efforts in Old Town and expressed hope that this heralded a new era of cooperation. Sansa even wrote that she would send a representative to the Citadel to discuss medical training for the North. Daenerys smiled. Such a small note, but laden with promise. She turned, summoning a quill and parchment from her guard. She wrote her reply right there in the tower's airy solitude, penning words of unity and friendship. She offered to reciprocate by sending maesters skilled in medicine and agriculture to Winterfell, to help rebuild and bring new knowledge of crop rotations that might thrive in colder climates. Signing the letter, she affixed her royal seal, a three-headed dragon pressed into hot wax. Stepping to the raven perched on the ledge, she gently fed it a crumb of dried meat and then tied the parchment to its leg. The bird took flight, wheeling away into the sky. Daenerys watched it go, the slip of parchment fluttering like a small, bright banner. A part of her thought, this is how real change spreads, on the wings of ravens, not just on the wings of dragons. Let the knowledge flow, let it connect the realm. Perhaps, After so many years of war, the seven kingdoms could find a measure of harmony through shared wisdom. She stood there for a time longer, gazing out at the world below, letting the horizon remind her of how vast Westeros truly was. Countless stories, countless lives, each deserving of truth. If the Citadel was now free to chronicle it all, to guide the realm with honesty, it might stave off the worst impulses of men. And if the worst should ever come again, a threat like the White Walkers or a tyrant's cruelty, at least the realm would not be blind. Leaving the tower, Daenerys descended the spiral steps with a lighter heart than she had known in a long while. She passed maesters in the halls, who bowed respectfully, no longer eyeing her with suspicion. Tyrion was at the base of the staircase, leaning on a railing, reading a scroll. He arched an eyebrow at her smile. "You seem particularly radiant this afternoon," he observed. "Did you discover a secret passage leading to a hoard of Valyrian steel? Or something equally miraculous?" Daenerys laughed softly, her voice echoing off the stone. "Nothing quite so grand, Tyrion, but I feel as though a heavy weight has been lifted. We have not solved all the realm's problems, yet we have set the Citadel on a new course. And that may be the foundation on which everything else rests." He folded the scroll and nodded. "I won't dispute that. Besides, they say the pen is mightier than the sword. Perhaps this is proof, at least in part." She sighed contentedly, continuing down the corridor. "Let the realm see that the Targaryen queen does not only bring flame and fury. Let them see I also bring a commitment to learning, to truth. That is how I wish to be remembered." He followed, his shorter strides quickening to keep pace with hers. "Not a bad legacy, Your Grace. In fact, if you manage to keep the realm at peace long enough for the Citadel's reforms to take root, you may be remembered more for this than for any conquest or battle. Historians love a good war story, but they also love to chronicle the dawn of a new era. Perhaps they'll dub it the Age of the Dragon's Knowledge." Daenerys smiled at the notion. "I do not care what name they give it, as long as it endures." They passed through a courtyard where some novices practiced archery, a skill occasionally taught for practical reasons. The novices stopped mid-draw, bowing at her approach. She simply nodded back, encouraging them to continue. Even that small moment felt symbolic. The Citadel was changing. Once so rigid, now more open to different disciplines, even under the watch of a Targaryen queen. That evening, Daenerys hosted a modest feast within the Citadel's walls, inviting archmasters, novices, scribes, and acolytes to join. It was not a lavish affair. She knew the Citadel prided itself on austerity, but it was meant as a gesture of camaraderie. Tables were laid out with fresh bread, fish from the Whispering Sound, and roasted vegetables from the local fields. Wine flowed, though not excessively, and the conversation was lively. Sam regaled them with tales of the free folk, describing how knowledge could unite even the most diverse peoples. Missandei shared stories of Noth and the traditions of her homeland. Tyrion cracked a few jokes at the expense of kings and queens past, eliciting wary laughter from the maesters. Archmaester Marwyn raised a toast. "To the Dragon Queen, who has reminded us all of the importance of free thought. May the Citadel never again be shackled by fear or gold. And may we learn to shine our torch into the darkest corners, for the sake of all the realm." Daenerys blushed slightly at the praise, but she raised her goblet in return. The clink of cups echoed through the hall. For a moment, she thought she saw in their eyes something akin to genuine admiration. She hoped it was not misplaced, that she would indeed prove worthy of their faith. On the dais, set aside from the main bustle, Tyrion remarked quietly that few had ever turned the maesters from their entrenched traditions with so little bloodshed. Daenerys silently thanked whatever fate had guided her here. For all the heartbreak and destruction she had seen, this victory, though quieter, seemed just as meaningful. Over the following weeks, the lines of supply from various houses began to materialize. Carts arrived bearing grain and parchment. Ships unloaded barrels of ink and quills. The Citadel scribes got to work copying precious manuscripts. Daenerys and her retinue prepared to leave Old Town eventually, for she had other duties across the realm. But before she departed, she oversaw the establishment of a new position, an independent overseer of the Citadel's finances, someone who would answer to a council of archmaesters rather than any single donor. Archmaester Italo, with his knowledge of library budgeting, took that post, and he reported regularly to a newly formed committee that included both Ambrose and Marwyn, ensuring a balance of perspectives. In a final gesture, Daenerys convened a public assembly by the harbor, where she formally declared her support for the Citadel's independence. Hundreds of Old Town citizens gathered, curious and cautious. She stood on a raised platform with the towering walls of the Citadel behind her. Tyrion, Grey Worm, and Missandei stood at her side. The archmaesters arrayed themselves in their ceremonial robes, chains gleaming. The sun was high, casting bright reflections on the water. Daenerys spoke in a clear, ringing voice that carried over the crowd. She declared that knowledge was the lifeblood of the realm, that ignorance only led to fear and division, and that the Citadel, freed from undue influence, would serve all corners of Westeros more faithfully than ever before. She pledged that in her reign, should the lords of the realm accept her claim, she would safeguard the Citadel's autonomy. No queen, she said, should rule from the shadows of ignorance. No queen should fear the truth. Let these walls stand, ever watchful, ever wise, so that we may learn from the past and walk bravely into the future. The crowd erupted in applause. Some cried out praises to the Dragon Queen. Others remained silent, but the sense of awe was palpable. Grey Worm stood with stoic pride, remembering the times Daenerys had freed the oppressed in Essos. Here, in a different way, she was freeing minds. Tyrion, arms folded, nodded approval. Missandei allowed herself a gentle smile, for she had long believed in Daenerys's better nature. Afterward, Daenerys prepared to depart. She and her followers would sail once more, eventually heading north, perhaps to King's Landing to continue her claim. She left behind a small detachment of Unsullied to protect the Citadel from any immediate threats, a gesture both symbolic and practical. The archmaesters agreed, recognizing that the enemies of knowledge might still strike. Ambrose, while still somewhat reserved, thanked her for her efforts to maintain stability. Marwyn gave her a rare, sincere bow, promising that the Citadel would keep its side of the bargain. Samwell Tarly and Gilly decided to remain in Old Town for a time, assisting with the reorganizing of the library. Daenerys bade them a warm farewell, thanking Sam for his invaluable contributions. She teased him that she might summon him to King's Landing one day to serve as Grand Maester if the realm accepted her as queen. Sam flushed but did not protest. Gilly simply beamed with pride. As Daenerys boarded her ship, she cast a final glance at the Citadel's spires. She knew that not everyone would embrace the changes at once, that there would be friction and perhaps sabotage from lingering Lannister sympathizers. But the core was set. The very heartbeat of knowledge in Westeros was no longer bound by fear. In time, that would transform the realm, more powerfully than any single battle. She felt Drogon's roar echo overhead, the wind from his wings stirring her hair. A sense of possibility and hope thrummed in her chest. And so the ships set sail, carrying Daenerys Targaryen away from Old Town's harbor, across the shimmering Honeywine and out toward the open sea. The old city receded behind her. The Citadel's towers shrank in the distance, but in her mind, they loomed large, a testament to what she had accomplished and a promise of the future she aimed to build. The day was bright, the sky clear. She inhaled the salt air, letting the brine fill her lungs with energy. Tyrion, beside her, dipped his head respectfully. "What lies ahead may still be fraught with danger," he murmured. "But for now, at least you've given the realm something precious, the freedom of truth. If the Seven are real, may they guide that truth safely." Daenerys nodded. "We will face what comes," she said simply. "But we do so with open eyes. That, Tyrion, makes all the difference." As the sails filled with wind, the distant city faded into a hazy silhouette. Dragons soared overhead, guardians of a queen who had freed more than just slaves in her lifetime. She had freed knowledge itself from the chains of tyranny. And in the quiet hush of the southwestern horizon, the Citadel stood sentinel, its torch lifted high, lighting the way for generations yet to come.